The high-security Galactic Detention Facility was a place where criminals, political prisoners, and fugitives from different planets were held. It was a cold, sterile environment where the prisoners were just numbers, not people. Sergeant Daniel Carter was used to the routine. As a human guard working in an alien prison, he had seen all kinds of creatures, some terrifying, some strangely beautiful, but none of them ever surprised him. That was until today. As he walked into the holding area, his gaze swept over the row of prisoners. Most of them ignored him, too lost in their own misery. But one alien woman stood out. She was sitting alone, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the floor. Daniel stopped when he saw her face. She had smooth silver blue skin, long dark hair braided tightly behind her head, and golden eyes that flickered with an intensity he couldn't quite place. She was a Xalver, a species known for their warrior culture. But unlike the other Xalver he had seen before, this one looked afraid. Then it happened. She looked up and met his gaze, and immediately she froze. Her golden eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, and her entire body went stiff. It was as if she had just seen a ghost. Daniel frowned. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The alien woman didn't answer. She just kept staring at him, her breathing uneven. Other prisoners noticed her reaction and glanced at her with curiosity, but none of them spoke. Daniel took a cautious step closer, gripping his stun baton just in case. "You understand standard?" he asked. Still, she didn't respond, but the fear in her eyes shifted into something else: shock, pain, longing. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, she spoke. "Kellerin." Daniel's brows pulled together. What? The name meant nothing to him, but the way she said it, with disbelief and heartbreak, made his chest tighten for reasons he couldn't explain. She suddenly stood up, hands clenched into fists, still staring at him as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You're dead," she whispered. "You died." Daniel took a step back. "I think you've got the wrong person," he said carefully. "I'm Sergeant Daniel Carter, a security officer for the Galactic Detention Facility. I don't know you." But she wasn't listening. Her breathing became faster, and her body trembled. The other prisoners were now watching with interest. Then, out of nowhere, a deep voice broke the silence. "Seems like our little warrior has lost her mind," sneered Gorzul, a towering reptilian guard with dark scales and cruel yellow eyes. He grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Did the human's face scare you, princess?" Daniel shot Gorzul a warning glare. "Back off." But the alien woman wasn't paying attention. She took one shaky step forward, still staring at him. And then, to Daniel's complete shock, a single tear slipped down her cheek. The prison hall fell silent. Every prisoner and guard in the room was staring at the alien woman as she stood frozen, her golden eyes locked onto Daniel. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under her intense stare. He had been a guard for years, trained to handle dangerous criminals, but something about this woman's reaction unsettled him. He had seen fear, anger, and desperation before, but never this. She whispered the name again, barely audible. "Kellerin." Daniel frowned. "I told you. I don't know who that is." But she didn't seem to hear him. Her breathing was uneven, her body trembling as if she was struggling to believe her own eyes. Gorzul, the reptilian guard, let out a rough chuckle. "You must have had a bad mate in the past, princess. This human must remind you of him." Daniel ignored him. He was more focused on the alien woman in front of him. He didn't know why, but something about her reaction made his heart beat faster. Finally, she spoke again, her voice hoarse. You look exactly like him." Daniel's frown deepened. "Like who?" She swallowed hard before answering. "My ex-husband." A murmur rippled through the other prisoners. Even Gorzul raised an eyebrow in mild interest. Daniel, however, remained calm. "That's impossible," he said firmly. "I've never met you before. I've never even been to your planet." She shook her head. "No, this isn't just a resemblance. You are him." Her hands curled into fists. "But you can't be. Because Calorin is dead." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had seen aliens with strange beliefs before. Some thought they could see the souls of the dead. Others believed in reincarnation. Maybe this was some kind of cultural confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I don't know what happened to your ex-husband, but I am not him." The woman's expression darkened. She studied his face, searching for something. Proof that she was wrong, or proof that she was right. "I don't believe you," she whispered. Daniel crossed his arms. "You're mistaken." She took a step closer, and for the first time, he noticed the scar on her wrist. A jagged mark, old but deep, like a wound that never properly healed. "You gave me this," she said softly. Daniel blinked. "What?" She raised her arm, showing him the scar. "Calorin, he saved me during the war. I was wounded, and he carried me through fire and rubble. I almost died. But he swore he wouldn't let me go. He held my wrist so tightly to stop the bleeding, and left this scar." Daniel stared at the scar. He had no memory of this, yet something about her words sent a strange shiver down his spine. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Who was Calorin? And why did he feel like this woman's words weren't entirely wrong? Daniel couldn't look away from the scar on the alien woman's wrist. His logical mind told him it was just a coincidence, that this was nothing more than a mistaken identity. But deep inside, something about her words made his chest tighten. He had no memory of holding her, of saving her, of any war. And yet, when she spoke, a strange feeling stirred inside him, like a forgotten dream trying to resurface. "This is crazy," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "I don't know you." The woman took a slow step forward, her golden eyes never leaving his face. "Then tell me, why do you look exactly like him?" Daniel didn't have an answer. Gorzel let out a mocking laugh. "I love this. Maybe she'll start calling you her husband next, human." Daniel shot him a glare. "Shut up, Gorzel." The reptilian smirked but stepped back. He knew better than to push Daniel too far. The other prisoners were still watching, their curiosity growing. It wasn't every day they witnessed a dramatic reunion, especially one between a human and an alien noblewoman. Daniel sighed. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Vela." "All right, Vela," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I don't know why you think I'm your ex-husband, but I'm not. I grew up on a human colony. I've never been in any war. I've never met you before." Vela's expression hardened. "Then explain this." Before Daniel could react, she reached up and touched the back of his neck. The moment her fingers brushed his skin, a sharp jolt shot through his body, like a spark of static electricity, but much deeper. A flash of images burst into his mind. Flames, a battlefield, a woman screaming his name, a promise whispered in the dark. Daniel gasped and yanked himself away. His breathing was uneven, his heart pounding. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. Vela's hands trembled. "You felt it, didn't you?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He had felt something, but it didn't make sense. His memories were clear. He was Daniel Carter, a soldier turned guard. He had no past life, no connection to this woman. And yet, he could still feel the phantom touch of fire against his skin, the distant echo of a name not his own. Calorin. Vela took a shaky breath. "You may not remember me, but I know who you are." Daniel wanted to deny it again, to tell her she was wrong, but his mind was spinning. If she was lying, then why did he feel something when she touched him? And if she was telling the truth, who was he before he became Daniel Carter? Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in fate, past lives, or any of that nonsense. He dealt with facts, with things he could see and prove. But right now, none of this made sense. Vela stood in front of him, watching him carefully, as if waiting for him to accept something he wasn't ready to. "I don't know what you did," Daniel said, his voice lower than before, "but I saw something." Her golden eyes softened. "Because you are him." Daniel shook his head. "No, I can't be." "You felt it," she insisted. "Didn't you?" He didn't want to admit it, but he had felt something. The images, fire, a battlefield, her voice crying out a name. They were still lingering in his mind, but they weren't his memories. They couldn't be. Gorzel snorted. "This is entertaining, but I don't see how it matters. The human says he's not your dead husband. Get over it." Vela ignored him. Her gaze remained on Daniel. "Do you remember anything?" Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "No," he lied. She took another step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "There's a way to prove it." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "And what's that?" Vela hesitated, then slowly reached for her belt. The guards had taken all weapons from prisoners, but they had allowed her to keep a small pendant, a piece of Kazalver heritage that held no threat. She lifted the pendant by its chain and held it out toward him. It was a simple metal ring, glowing faintly with engraved symbols. Daniel stared at it, feeling an odd pull toward it. "This belonged to Calorin," Vela said. "It was given to him as a bond mark." Daniel didn't reach for it. A bond mark. In Kazalver culture, it's given when two warriors pledge their lives to each other. Daniel looked at her sharply. "So it's a marriage token." She nodded. "Only one of them can wear it at a time. If the other dies, it is passed down." Daniel frowned. "And if you truly aren't Calorin, then this will mean nothing to you." Vela took a deep breath. "But if you are, your body will remember." Daniel didn't believe in magic or fate, but his fingers twitched slightly as he reached out. The moment his skin touched the pendant, a shock ran up his arm. Not pain, not fire. Recognition. His pulse sensed with the rhythm of something unseen. And in the back of his mind, a whisper drifted through his thoughts, a name he had never spoken before, but somehow knew belonged to him. Calorin. Daniel jerked his hand back as if burned, his breath coming fast. Vela watched him, tears brimming in her golden eyes. "You are him," she whispered. Daniel took a step back, his heart pounding. His hand still tingled from touching the pendant. He looked down at it, as if expecting to see burn marks on his fingers. But there was nothing, no injury, no proof that anything had happened. And yet, in the back of his mind, the name echoed. Calorin. It was impossible. He had never heard that name before today, never seen this woman before, never fought in any war. But the way his body had reacted, the way his pulse had sensed with something invisible, it terrified him. Vela's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Now you understand, don't you?" she whispered. Daniel clenched his jaw. "I don't understand anything," he snapped. He didn't want to understand. She took a step forward. "You felt it." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Vela's expression softened. "Calorin wasn't just my husband," she said. "He was a warrior, a protector. He fought for our people, for justice, and in the end, he died for it." Daniel crossed his arms. "Then I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not him." Vela flinched slightly, but she didn't back down. "I know what I saw, and I know what you felt." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Even if I did feel something, it doesn't mean anything. Maybe your pendant is rigged with some kind of alien tech." Vela shook her head. "It's not technology. It's memory." Daniel frowned. "Memory." She hesitated, then said, "Calorin made a promise before he died. He swore that no matter what happened, he would find me again." Daniel felt a strange pressure in his chest, but he shoved it away. "That's a nice story, but I'm not some reincarnated alien warrior." "Then why do you know his name?" Vela challenged. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. She was right. He had never heard that name before today. And yet, when he touched the pendant, it had been there, waiting in the back of his mind, as if it had always belonged to him. No, it wasn't possible. He was Daniel Carter, a human soldier, a prison guard. He had a life, memories, training. He wasn't some long-dead alien hero. Vela watched him, her expression unreadable. "You may not remember me yet," she said quietly, "but I know you." Daniel exhaled slowly. He needed answers. He needed proof that this was just a coincidence. But deep inside, a small part of him, the part that had whispered Kelleran's name, wasn't so sure anymore. Daniel spent the rest of his shift in a daze. The cold, sterile halls of the prison felt different now, like something was out of place. Or maybe he was. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The name, the pendant, the strange jolt of recognition. It didn't make sense. Vela had stared at him like he was her lost love brought back to life. But he wasn't. He was Daniel Carter, a human soldier, nothing more. Then why did his chest tighten whenever she said that name? Why did his fingers still tingle from touching the pendant? He needed answers. That night, after his shift, he went to his small quarters in the prison barracks. The room was simple, just a bed, a desk, and a metal locker where he kept his belongings. He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. He wasn't the type to believe in fate or reincarnation. He had always trusted logic. But this wasn't logical. With a deep breath, he accessed his personal data records on the screen in front of him. Everything he knew about himself was there. Name, Daniel Carter. Age, 28. Birthplace, Lennox 4 Colony. He clicked on his early childhood records. No data available before age 10. Daniel frowned. That wasn't unusual. Many human colonies had lost records due to wars or system failures. But now, for the first time in his life, it felt strange. His memories from before that age were foggy. He knew he had been an orphan, raised in a military program, but there were gaps, moments he couldn't fully recall. And then there were the dreams. For years, he had dreamed of burning skies, of a woman's voice calling out, of his hands gripping a sword he had never seen in his real life. He had always assumed they were just fragments of his imagination. But now, was it possible they were something more? A sudden knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. He stood up, his instincts sharp. Prison guards didn't get casual visits. When he opened the door, Vela was standing there. She had no weapons, no guards escorting her, just her golden eyes staring up at him, filled with something that made his stomach tighten. "You shouldn't be here," Daniel said, glancing down the hall. If she was caught outside her cell, there would be trouble. "I needed to see you," she said softly, "because I know you're starting to doubt everything you thought was true." Daniel didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure if she was wrong, and that terrified him. Daniel hesitated at the door, his muscles tense. He knew he should call security. Vela wasn't supposed to be here. But instead, he stepped aside and let her in. The moment the door shut behind her, she turned to face him. "You're questioning everything now, aren't you?" Daniel crossed his arms. "I don't believe in fate or past lives." Vela studied him for a long moment before saying, "Then explain why you feel it." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short hair. "I don't know, and I don't like not knowing." Vela took a step closer. Kelleran used to say the same thing. He tensed at the name. That name. It was haunting him now, creeping into his thoughts when he least expected it. He shook his head. "I have memories, Vela. A life. I didn't just wake up one day as someone else." Vela's golden eyes softened. "Maybe not, but memories can be erased, rewritten." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Kelleran didn't just die. He was taken, captured. The enemy never returned his body. And now, you, a human who looks exactly like him, have no memories before age 10. Daniel's stomach twisted. He wanted to argue, to call it ridiculous, but deep inside, something told him she was right. Vela reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, steady. "I know this is hard," she said gently, "but you have to ask yourself, what if everything you know about yourself is a lie?" Daniel swallowed hard. He pulled his hand away and turned to face the wall, breathing deeply. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But the cracks in his reality were spreading. "Let me help you remember," Vela said softly. Daniel clenched his fists. "And if I don't want to?" She was silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "Then I'll lose you again." The quiet pain in her voice hit something deep inside him. Daniel closed his eyes. Somewhere, buried in the forgotten corners of his mind, he already knew the truth, and it scared him more than anything ever had. Daniel paced the room, his mind racing. Everything Vela said shouldn't make sense. It shouldn't be possible. But deep inside, it felt right. His missing memories. The name Calorin whispering in the back of his mind. The strange pull he felt toward Vela, as if some invisible thread connected them. He turned to her. "Let's say, for a second, you're right. That I'm him. How could I be Calorin if I'm human?" Vela hesitated, then said softly, "I don't know for sure, but there are ways. Mind wipes, genetic alteration, soul transfer." She exhaled. "The enemies who took him, they had technology beyond what we understand." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't remember anything," he muttered. "If I was Calorin, shouldn't I know?" "Maybe they took your memories on purpose," Vela said. "Maybe they wanted to use you for something else." Daniel clenched his jaw. That was what scared him the most. What if his entire life, everything he thought he was just a lie? Vela stepped closer. "I can help you remember." Daniel hesitated. Did he want to? What if he wasn't Calorin? What if this was just a coincidence, and he was chasing shadows? But what if he was? What if he had a past, a life, a purpose that had been stolen from him? Vela reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metallic device. "This is a Xalver memory trigger," she said. "It's not dangerous. It won't force anything. But if there's something locked away in your mind, this can help unlock it." Daniel stared at the device. If he did this, there would be no turning back. He took a deep breath. Then he reached out and took it. Vela watched him, her golden eyes filled with quiet hope. Daniel pressed the device to his temple, and suddenly, the world around him shattered. A flood of images, sounds, and emotions rushed into his mind. A battlefield burning under twin moons. A sword in his hand, heavy with the weight of war. A promise whispered in the dark. Vela, reaching for him, his fingers slipping from hers, his last breath. A cold void swallowing him whole. And then, darkness. Daniel gasped, stumbling back as the memories crashed over him. Vela caught him before he could fall. He looked at her, his breathing heavy, his heart racing. And for the first time, he whispered, "Vela," not as Daniel Carter, but as Calorin. Daniel staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for support. His breathing was uneven, his head pounding like a drum. But it wasn't just pain, it was something else. Memories, flashes of another life raced through his mind. Not as Daniel Carter, the human soldier, but as Calorin, the Xalver warrior. He saw Vela's face, not in this cold prison, but under twin moons, her golden eyes filled with warmth, not sorrow. He saw himself holding her, making a promise. "I will find you again, in any life." Daniel clenched his jaw, his chest tightening. Vela stepped closer. "You remember, don't you?" she whispered. Daniel's fingers curled into a fist. "I don't know what I remember," he muttered, "but it's real. I know that much." He looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly she wasn't a stranger anymore. The scar on her wrist, The way her voice felt familiar even before she spoke his name. The way his heart ached when he saw her tears. None of this was a coincidence. But how was it possible? I died, Daniel whispered, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. I remember dying. Vela swallowed hard, nodding. You were taken. The enemy never returned your body. And now you're here, human in form, but still you. Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. That doesn't make sense. How can I be me, and not me? Vela hesitated. I don't know, but I don't care how it happened. I only care that you're here, that I found you. Daniel ran a hand down his face. His whole life, was it a lie? Was he even human? Or just a ghost of someone long dead, trapped in another body? Vela reached out and touched his hand, just lightly, but enough to ground him. I thought I lost you forever, she whispered. But I was right. You came back. Daniel looked down at her hand in his. His mind was a storm. He had spent his life believing he was a man named Daniel Carter, a soldier, a guard. But now, the memories of Kelleran burned inside him. The love he had for Vela, the war he fought, the betrayal that led to his death, and something else, a truth he hadn't yet uncovered. Daniel took a slow breath. He wasn't sure what was real anymore, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just Daniel Carter, and if he wanted the truth, he had to find out who had stolen his past. Daniel sat in silence, his thoughts heavy. He had spent years believing he was just another human soldier, but now, everything had changed. He wasn't just Daniel Carter. He was Kelleran, or at least he had been. Vela watched him closely, her golden eyes searching for something in his face. What now? She asked softly. Daniel clenched his fists. He wanted to say he didn't know, that he needed time to process everything. But deep inside, something had awakened, something that had been taken from him. I need answers, he said firmly. Who did this to me? Who erased my past? And why? Vela's expression darkened. The ones who took you. They never returned your body to us. We thought you were dead. But now, I realize, they didn't just kill you. She swallowed. They turned you into one of them. Daniel felt a chill run through him. If what she was saying was true, then his entire human identity, his memories, his records, his past, was all manufactured. For what purpose? His gut twisted. Had he been some kind of experiment? A weapon? I need to get off this planet, Daniel said suddenly. If I stay here, I'll never know the truth. Vela nodded. I'll help you. Daniel hesitated. If you come with me, you'll become a fugitive. Are you sure? She gave him a small, sad smile. I lost you once. I won't lose you again. Daniel's chest tightened. Something deep inside him still belonged to her. He nodded. Then we need a plan. The escape begins. Under the cover of night, they made their way through the facility. Vela knew the guard patrols, and Daniel had access to restricted areas. They moved quickly, avoiding security cameras, their steps silent. As they neared the exit bay, an alarm suddenly blared. They know, Vela hissed. Daniel cursed. He had seconds to decide, run now or fight. His instincts kicked in. He grabbed a stun baton from a nearby rack and turned to face the guards storming in. But as he did, something shifted inside him. The way he held the weapon, the way his body reacted, it wasn't human. It was Exalver. With smooth, precise movements, he disarmed the first guard in seconds, using techniques he had no memory of learning. Vela's breath caught. Kelleran. Daniel didn't hesitate. He took down the second guard just as easily. His body remembered, even if his mind didn't. Grabbing Vela's hand, he pulled her toward the docking bay. A small ship was waiting, their way out. As they climbed inside, Daniel turned to her. No matter what I find out, he said, I'm not letting them control me again. Vela smiled. Then let's go find the truth. The ship's engines roared to life, and Kellerin, reborn as Daniel Carter, disappeared into the stars.